Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Center for International Governance Innovation, or CIGI as we say. My name is Fred Kuntz. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs at CIGI. Tonight's signature lecture is co-sponsored by CIGI and the Balsley School of International Affairs, located here at the CIGI campus in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. I'd also like to thank CIGI's public event sponsors, 570 News and Wordsworth Books. Besides the audience here tonight, we also have a global audience watching on the live webcast. Following tonight's address, we welcome questions from the audience, either at the microphones here at CIGI, or if you're watching online, you can ask questions through the live chat function on your screen, and we'll transmit those to our speaker. We have had some power outages in the area today due to a good old Canadian winter storm. Some buildings just in the immediate vicinity have lost their power. We're still okay, but if it happens here, please remain calm and we'll carry on. We may have to reboot some systems, but we'll just carry on as if it wasn't happening. Our topic tonight is the Canada-US Innovation Partnership, presented by the United States 22nd Ambassador to Canada, His Excellency David Jacobson. Introducing Mr. Jacobson tonight is CIGI's Vice President of Programs, David DeWitt. David joined CIGI last year, coming from a distinguished career in academia, most recently as Associate Vice President of Research, Social Sciences and Humanities, and as a Professor of Political Science at York University. As an expert in global security and international affairs, David DeWitt is author or contributing editor of numerous books, articles, and papers on Canadian foreign security and defense policy, international and regional security and conflict management. And at CIGI, David DeWitt oversees the strategy and implementation of all of our work programs and research activities. So please welcome David DeWitt.
Thanks very much, Fred. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us here tonight in person, and I know there are many from around the world who are online. As Fred mentioned, our topic this evening is the Canada-US partnership. This subject is neither new nor novel, but that makes it no less significant and certainly no less warranting serious examination. For Canadians, our relationship with the United States and with Americans is a touchstone upon which so much of what we do is measured. Whether in business, in trade, in sports, culture, or in politics, whether consciously or not, we compare ourselves and are compared by others to Americans and to the United States. The issue of partnership, and even more so, innovative partnership, which is the focal point of the ambassador's remarks, is novel. We too often assume a relatively benign connection with those south of the border, not realizing that it takes constant effort, determination, investment, energy, and goodwill to sustain such a complex bilateral relationship. And today, it's such a complicated world where our ties that bind or that may well pull us in various directions, often in contradictory and competitive ways, are now not just government to government or people to people, but involve many different types of actors and so many different forms of connections. We need always to examine and re-examine in order to ensure that this most important and unique partnership, this unique relationship, remains strong and vibrant and beneficial to both. Ambassadors and their colleagues are principal cogs in that machinery to ensure that this is just what happens. David Jacobson presented his credentials to the Governor-General of Canada on October the 2nd of 2009, becoming the 22nd United States Ambassador to our country. Before coming to Ottawa, Ambassador Jacobson served in the White House as Special Assistant to the President for Presidential Personnel. Prior to his government service, Ambassador Jacobson was a corporate lawyer in Chicago, where he was active in civic and political affairs. He holds degrees from Georgetown University and from Johns Hopkins, and it's a great pleasure to invite him to the stage. Ambassador Jacobson.
David, thank you very much. And you know, we spent dinner comparing friends, mischievous friends that we have in common. And it's great to be here, and thanks to CG. I also want to thank David Welch, the director of the Balsillie School for International Affairs, Feridun, my good friend. It is good to be here, and thanks to the University of Waterloo. It is a treat always to be able to talk about how Canada and the United States can work together to maintain the standard of living that we have through innovation. I must say, however, that it is more than a little bit intimidating to be lecturing people at the University of Waterloo about innovation. This university and this city are known throughout Canada, throughout the United States, and around the world as places where innovation flourishes. It's also an honor to speak at the Balsillie School of International Affairs, named after a great Canadian and a very good friend of mine, Jim Balsillie. Jim's contribution to the economic vitality of this country, to the strength of this university, and to the very notion of innovation sets a standard that the rest of us truly can only aspire to. Jim, I am particularly pleased and honored that you've joined us here tonight, and thank you very much. If I knew that all I had to do was say something nice about you and everybody would applaud, I'd keep doing it all night. It was exactly 100 years ago that Wilfrid Laurier stood in the House of Commons as the Prime Minister of Canada and delivered his very famous speech encouraging freer trade between the United States and Canada. For decades, the border had effectively been closed. The state of the relations between Canada and the United States were, as described by Laurier himself, a blot upon the civilization of the two countries. Many on both sides of the border opposed freer trade and closer ties. But Laurier saw the potential of a deeper relationship, and he was tireless in advancing and in defending that belief, not only in greater economic ties with the United States, but also in a greater bond of friendship. And Laurier envisioned, and I quote here, a spectacle that would astound the world by its novelty and its grandeur, a spectacle of two people living side by side along a frontier nearly 4,000 miles long, with not a cannon, with not a gun frowning across it, but living in harmony, in mutual confidence, and with no other rivalry than a generous emulation in commerce and the arts of peace. Now, in the years and the decades that followed, Laurier's vision did indeed come to pass. The independence of our two countries has been maintained, but the interdependence has grown. We have become better friends, we've become better partners, and that bond, that partnership, has benefited over the years from new ideas, from new initiatives, from new generations, and from fresh thinking. Now, as the ambassador from the United States, it is my solemn obligation to have in my possession at all times at least 10 minutes worth of lofty rhetoric about the relationship between the United States and Canada. Its history, its economic importance. There's the part where I always say that we're more than neighbors, we're friends. And that is all, of course, true. We are friends, and the relationship between our two countries truly is special. But this seems like a pretty savvy crowd. So I'm going to leave the loftiness aside for this evening, and instead I want to talk to you about innovation. Now, I don't have to tell anybody in this room that these are difficult economic times, probably more so in my country than in Canada. But each of our countries has a long history of resilience. The world has not done well betting against our people over the last couple of hundred years. And I think all of us here in this room understand that innovation has been the engine of economic growth for millennia. Entire civilizations have been built on innovative ideas dating all the way back to things like fire and the wheel and stirrups. And more recently, we have seen our standard of living increase dramatically as a result of the benefits and of the jobs that were created by advances in healthcare and telecommunications, information technology, and the BlackBerry. Innovation is our hope for a better tomorrow. It allows us to learn faster, to reach further, to work better, to dream bigger, and to live longer. And for generations, North America has led the world in innovation. But our innovation dominance is clearly being challenged. In order to be able to hand a strong North America to future generations, we must not let our innovation leadership slip away. We must lead in discovery. We must lead in the application of technology to improve the safety and the well-being of the citizens across North America. But like the weather, it's easy for most of us to talk about innovation, but most of us, unlike Jim, can't do very much about it. And what I was thinking about as I was preparing these remarks is, what can we do? Now, I must admit, I had a very nice speech that I wrote last week where I was going to talk about how we had to do a better job with respect to education and infrastructure and the protection of intellectual property rights and things of that nature. And each of those is important. And maybe if you invite me back sometime, I can give you that speech that I wrote last week. But I read an article in this past Sunday's New York Times by John Gertner, and it got me to thinking about something else that, quite frankly, I had not focused much upon. Something that I think was holding us back from reigniting the innovation flood that we experienced during the 20th century in my country and in yours: our culture. Now, I suspect there are a few of you out there who are thinking this guy has totally lost it, but bear with me. The article in the New York Times was about Bell Labs, and it's extraordinary. I see some people nodding, and they may have read it themselves, but the extraordinary run of innovation that Bell Labs had from the 1920s through the 1980s. And I happened to even bother to read it because I remember in junior high school, I wrote a report on Bell Labs. I don't know why we called them reports, but I wrote one. And the list of accomplishments at Bell Labs was mind-numbing. They include hi-fi sound, then stereos, then digital recordings, the fax machine, then digital computing, direct dialing, then cellular phones, then fiber optic networks, the Unix operating system, lasers, and most famously, the transistor upon which almost everything we do today depends. Every single one of these inventions didn't just create vast wealth in our society, didn't just create hundreds of thousands, if not millions of jobs. Each of these discoveries literally changed the way we lived. Now, why was Bell Labs able to accomplish all this? How could one relatively small group of scientists and engineers come up with so many groundbreaking ideas? How were they able to commercialize all those ideas? Were they smarter than we are now? Well, they were pretty smart, but I doubt that anything happened to the gene pool during the 1980s. Have all the groundbreaking ideas been thought of? I rather doubt that. The article examines the impact of three relatively simple concepts that guided everything that they did at Bell Labs. Principles that were possible because of the culture that existed there, and also because of the culture that existed across our societies at the time. The first one was a conviction that there had to be a critical mass of talented people, a critical mass to foster a constant interchange of ideas. Physical proximity was everything. Thinkers and doers under one roof. Physicists, metallurgists, engineers having lunch together. They designed a single building at Bell Labs with infinitely long hallways. And there was a rule And the rule was that everybody's doors had to remain open. So when you went anywhere, to lunch, to your car, to the bathroom, you had to walk past all those open doors. And maybe on your way, you'd peek in and you'd see what others were working on or what they were thinking about. This is not the world that we live in today. We telecommute. If we want to go really slow, we make a telephone call. More likely, we send an email or we tweet. And ask yourselves, when was the last time, and perhaps in a university setting this is more true than some other places, but when was the last time that you had lunch with a colleague just to chat about what they were working on, just to ask them what they were thinking about, just to try to cross-pollinate your ideas? And my guess is that an awful lot of you are going to be sitting there and saying, I just don't have time for that. And you may be right that you don't have time, but when you don't take that time to do that, our innovation, all of our innovation, suffers. Now, I don't know how Jim Balsillie and Mike Lazaridis came up with the BlackBerry, and maybe someday they'll tell me. But my guess is that it had something to do with people of very disparate backgrounds sitting down and talking to each other, sharing their ideas. The second key at Bell Labs that was critical to their innovation success, as someone put it, was that they were in an ivory tower, but, and this is a very important but, they had a factory downstairs. They were big thinkers. They did lots of basic research, but the goal was always to incorporate their discoveries into a telephone system. And that practical application of their big thinking tended to focus their minds. There were Bell Labs satellite facilities in AT&T manufacturing plants around the country so that the big thinkers could actually see what was needed, so that they could actually see how to incorporate their ideas into businesses. In North America these days, we lament the fact that so much manufacturing has moved offshore, but we lament it mostly because of the loss of jobs and because of the impact that it has on our GDP. But one other unfortunate consequence of the move of our move from manufacturing toward a service economy is that this cross-fertilization between research and application is just more difficult when the manufacturing takes place 10,000 miles away. Now, the third key to success at Bell Labs was the time frame that they operated within. Put simply, people were given the time to work through the discovery process. It took years to invent the transistor, and during that time, the researchers were given a free hand. The marketplace was not demanding that lasers be invented by the third quarter of the year, or else the analysts would downgrade your stock. See a few laughs here. A good part of the reason that Bell Labs was able to take this relaxed approach was because they were part of a telephone monopoly, and along with that came monopoly profits, and that wasn't so good. But somehow, we have to allow at least parts of our great companies in North America to get out of this tyranny of quarterly sales and profits to allow them to innovate. Now, ironically, our culture was changed by the discoveries at Bell Labs and their progeny. Computers, cell phones, fiber optic networks, BlackBerries have sped things up. And those very changes have made it harder for others to follow in that path of innovation that was blazed by companies like Bell Labs. Now, I am not one of those old guys who always looks back at the so-called good old days. I'm not like Archie Bunker, who sings about how his old LaSalle ran great, although I did have a great Mustang, I must tell you that. And Jim, I do love BlackBerries. In fact, my wife believes I love them a little bit too much, particularly during family dinners. But I do believe that we are sacrificing something, not just personally, but creatively, when we don't work together in places with a critical mass of thinkers, when we reduce our personal interactions to fleeting electronic messages, when we move too fast, we lose some of our ability to innovate. We have to find a way to get at least some of that back. So folks, maybe the next time when you're thinking about how we do a better job of innovating, along with good and important discussions about education and infrastructure and intellectual property rights, think a little bit about the culture in your organizations. Think a little bit about the culture in your societies. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. So who's first? I think we've got some online questions as well that they'll send us if everyone's scared to ask. Anybody? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you've got questions, if you can walk over to the microphone, I guess there's one on each side, that'd be great.
So this is really interesting. I have to say I don't know anything about economics and I know little about innovation, so I wasn't sure what the evening would bring, but this was really interesting. I like the way you phrased it with regard to the culture that we're in. What I was thinking about, though, is that, so everything's a trade-off, right? I mean,
everything in life is a trade-off.
So part of the deal when I was thinking about your image of Bell Labs and the open door and the positive sort of feedback about that is that there's also the open door and somebody's working and I'm interrupted. And how do I can't actually have a reasonable thought unless I really have a chunk of time that's there. And that system is at odds with that. And there's also something about, I mean, I think of myself as a pretty social person, but social for social sake, I don't know about. So the fact that we're having a lunch with somebody, it's always interesting. I mean, most people are pretty interesting. And what are they doing? But is there also a sense that if I really wanted to be cross-fertilizing things, we all have to have some sort of similar goal? Or maybe not. I mean, maybe there's the chance of, you know, whoever you talk with. Anyway, I would just basically like to hear you, your thoughts on the 3 points that you made, but especially the first two, and the trade-offs that may or may not be involved in that.
Well, you know, you make a good point. Sure, there are trade-offs, and sure, when, you know, somebody pokes their head into your office and starts chatting with you about whatever, it's time that you're not spending doing what you need to do. And some of that is wasted. But in my personal experience, you know, and everybody's a product of their own experience, it is people who are doing something usually completely different, something that maybe I know nothing about. Or maybe I'm talking to them about what I'm doing and they don't know a lot about it, but they ask really simple questions, you know, well, why or how or something. And it's what gets me to thinking. And yeah, some of it's wasted and some of it is time that you spend probably explaining things that you don't need to explain. But you never, you know, it only takes 1 second to get an idea. And it is, you know, I suspect, I don't know how, again, I don't know how they did BlackBerrys, I don't know how they did transistors, but my guess is there was somebody sitting there one day and just something happened. And I think that you, and certainly the experience at Bell Labs, you maximize the chances that that real creativity, you know, one of the other things they talked about in this article was creativity now is viewed as somebody who writes an app for a cell phone. Yeah, that's fine. It puts 20 people to work or something. But the really fundamental things, the things that change our society, the things that create hundreds of thousands of jobs, the things that drive the economies in our countries. Those are things that just, they just click with somebody. And I do think, again, this is my own personal experience, but I do believe that I have had, and believe me, I've never thought of transistors, but what few ideas I've ever had, I think more often come from talking with somebody who just does something totally unrelated to me. And it's typically not talking to somebody else who is expert in what I'm expert in. I'm expert in what small number of things I'm expert in. I know about that. If it's talking with somebody, or if it is somebody who's expert in what I'm expert in, they're doing it a little differently, or they're in a different place in the development cycle. And it is this cross-fertilization, and it's, you're right, it's a trade-off, but as I said, everything's a trade-off. All right, well, we've got one here from John from Red Deer, and I must say, before I read his question, I've got to say, this is always my answer. I always get asked, what is your favorite place in Canada? And I always say Red Deer, Alberta. Now, after tonight, I will no doubt say Waterloo. But I do, and I'm always asked, and my wife Julie and I, very early on when we were traveling around Canada, and we've spent a lot of time traveling around Canada, as David mentioned earlier. We went to Red Deer, and we met with the mayor and his wife and the civic leaders in Red Deer, and they were so nice. So John, from my favorite place in Canada, Red Deer, the question is, can the United States and Canada develop a trade policy that preserves our capacities to both meet national economic priorities, but also maintains cultural protection in the diversity of the countries and their citizens? And I think the simple answer to that is yes. We are in the midst of, I think, on the trade front, some rather dramatic developments in the relationship between our two countries. One is the Beyond the Border initiative, which is really rethinking the border. How can we get beyond the view that we have to make a choice between security on the one hand and trade and efficiency on the other? And we've learned that you can really, if you're smart, if you're creative, if you do more of the smart things and fewer of the dumb things, you can really have both. Another is the parallel effort that the President and the Prime Minister announced that we call the Regulatory Cooperation Council, which is our attempt to try to smooth some of the regulatory differences between our two countries, the silly things that just don't make any sense. The example I always use is Cheerios, that because I'm pathetic, I have the same thing for breakfast every single morning. Cheerios. I had them in the United States where they were fortified in accordance with the recipe that is demanded by the United States government. And now that I live in Canada, I eat the Cheerios that are fortified with a different recipe that is required by the Canadian government. And I can assure everyone in this room that I am neither healthier nor cheerier in one country or the other. And, the first time I told this story, people said, well, some guy raised his hand in the back of the room and says, well, okay, that's great. Which one should we use? And my answer was, I don't care. And there are some that are a whole lot more serious than Cheerios. There are auto safety regulations that are different. There are food safety regulations that are different. There are pharmaceutical regulations. And these are things that make it more expensive. They lower customer satisfaction because you got to keep changing the line. They make businesses in North America less competitive. And so the idea is to reduce as many of those as we possibly can. And then there are some broader trade agreements, the largest of which is something called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the United States is working on with some Asian countries, and that Canada and Mexico and Japan are trying to join. And the reason I say all this in response to this question of can you maintain your differences, one of the big complaints about Beyond the Border and regulatory cooperation, at least before we started announcing the details of this, was could particularly Canadians are more worried about this probably than Americans, but Americans as well. Could these two countries maintain their sovereignty? Could they maintain their independence and still make this progress? And the answer is, of course. Nobody in my country wants to impose our rules on Canada. You know, there was just a survey, I think it was announced last week, and Canadians have a 96% approval rating in the United States. It is the highest level that has ever been measured in this, and they've been doing it back into, I think, the 70s. So, you know, we think you're pretty good. I don't know where they found the 4%, but we like you. And the point is, we can try to work together. We can try to find common ground. We can try to increase our trade. We can try to get regulations more consistent. We can try to make the border more transparent to safe goods and decent people. But we can only do that successfully if we respect each other, if we respect each other's values, if we respect the differences. You know, we can do it and we will do it.
Mr. Ambassador,
yeah.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the joy, humor, and humility that you've brought here today.
Ask my wife about the humility part of it.
Let's not talk about what our wives want us to look at.
Just kidding, Julie, if you're watching.
It's even worse than international relationships. So, I'd like to invite you also to another mayor's dinners if you wish to come back in the near future. There's one at the end of March, but you'll be sharing with, if you come back, you'll be sharing with not only the mayors, but probably about 300 other individuals in the thing. So if you really want to get down and get dirty and finding out information, come back with everybody who wants to come.
All right, it's a deal.
Deal. There, we've got it on tape. I'm a dual citizen. I've had my feet in two countries for 39 years, okay? And I come from Bridgeport, back of the arts, McKinley Park, you name it.
I'm a Chicago guy, so.
No kidding. Yeah. I helped build the expressways that got people in and out of it.
All right.
So anyway, I still have that connection, okay? And we'll always have the connection. The difficulty I see in the last couple of years is that the sense of family and the sense of commercial and every other instance of neighborliness have been overshadowed by the fear factor, okay? So when I go over the border, I declare that I'm a Canadian citizen. I declare I'm a U.S. citizen. But at the border, the border guard looks at me and says, well, why are you so treasonous? Not in his speech, but in his eyes. And if he ever really asks, I tell him it's because I have the ability to be both, and I can do well on both sides and help both sides. So I'm asking you, how do we rekindle the neighborly ties that have been here for in excess of 200 years, okay? Because they were, as an example, in 1812, we had John Jacob Astor, and we had people from the Hudson Bay Company that decided, let's go occupy Fort Michilimackinac, so that once we do that, you and I can keep trading while the rest of the people over on that other end of the continent, if they want to bash their heads together, they can do that. So that type of pragmatic approach is what I'm suggesting could be done. And the question is, how do you suggest that we implement that neighborly, pragmatic approach, that we aren't fearing each other for what might happen?
Well, okay, it's a good question. First of all, I will say this. There is no excuse ever for people on either side of the border, at border crossings, whichever, whether you're going north or south, to be anything but polite until there's a problem, okay? There just isn't an excuse for that. You know, if you have hundreds of thousands of people crossing a day, you know, people are people, and somebody has a tough day or whatever, and you know somebody may misbehave. There's no excuse for it, but it's inevitable. But the other thing to keep in mind, and then I'll address your question specifically, but the other thing to keep in mind is that the people who are guarding Canada, the people who are guarding the United States, and this is not a one-way problem, but the people who are guarding our countries at the borders in particular have to be right 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They've got to be perfect, or as close to perfect as they can possibly make it. The bad guys have to be right once every 10 years. And the pressure on them is extraordinary, all right? And so this is a little bit of defense of what they're doing. That's the sort of the personal piece of it. The somewhat more institutional piece, that is what this whole beyond the border thing is about. The idea is to make it easier for honest, decent people to get across more easily, more quickly, fewer delays, and safe goods to be able to move back and forth. It is going to make it more convenient for citizens on both sides of the border. It is going to make trade between the two largest trading partners in the history of the world more efficient and more effective. It is going to lower costs. It's going to increase jobs. It's going to do all those things. Now, how are we going to do it? Well, there's a lot of stuff, but the example that I always use is you can divide. It doesn't matter whether you're dealing with people or with goods. And some of the students, I don't know if they're here, but I met with some of your students who are really quite good. And I was talking about this earlier today, but you can divide the world into three categories. Let's do people. There's one category that the folks at Homeland Security technically refer to as RBGs, really bad guys. And those are people, you know, you don't want them, we don't want them, nobody wants them. At the other extreme are people who, before they get to the border, we know are okay. And the way you know that they're okay before they get to the border is you have some information about them. It's true of goods, it's true of people. You know who they are before they get there. The best example of this in our Trusted Traveler programs is the Nexus program. And I suspect a number of people in this room have Nexus cards. And that's what it is. You apply online, they do a background check, they do an interview, and if they think you're okay, you get a Nexus card. And you can move through more expeditiously. One of the problems with Nexus is you don't move through expeditiously enough. You don't get enough benefits for it. And so one of the things we're going to try to do is juice up the benefits so more people apply. The third category is everybody else, all the people in the middle that we don't know anything about. We don't know they're bad, we don't know they're good, they're in the middle. And they're the people that we have to spend time on. But by putting more people in the whole philosophy of this is, let's take as many people out of that middle category and put them into the good category as we possibly can, so that we aren't making decisions about them at the border, which is the worst place to make decisions about anything because you have limited resources. And then not only will they get through quicker, but we'll be able to take care of everybody else at the border both more expeditiously, and we'll be safer because we're not wasting time checking on my grandmother. We're spending our time, you know, we live in a world of limited resources. There are limited resources at the border, and so let's try to spend them in the right way. And if we do that, and we do it with respect to people, and we do it with respect to goods, and we get a lot more people into these trusted trade or trusted traveler programs, we're going to end up with a border that is safer, it is more efficient, and it is probably a heck of a lot friendlier. So that's part of it. We're also spending a lot of money, and we're going to spend a lot of money on modernizing infrastructure, on a number of other things. But that really is the key to the thing.
Thanks very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it very much. Just to come back to the innovation question, when I think back on the modern era, at least, it occurs to me that there's certain times and places where there are incredible bursts of innovation. In the 19th century, it was Victorian England, when the basis of early industrialization and the exposure of Britain to the world was British people were able to do amazing creative things. In the 20th century, it was largely the United States, but not just the United States, where there are incredible bursts of innovation, but in the context largely, primarily of wars, right? World Wars I and II, and the Cold War, and the Bell Labs.
Awful lot of innovation in the 20s and the 30s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s.
So it makes me wonder whether one of the spurs to innovation is some combination of novelty and adversity.
Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't be here. I'd be, okay. I'd be, perhaps be out on the golf course. But I think that, first of all, and I mentioned this in my remarks, I do not buy the notion that, you know, everything has been invented. All the great stuff has already been thought of. If you look back at history, and you can go way back, people thought that. And there are people, well, anything that's important has already been invented. Well, turned out not to be the case. And there will be things that are going to be invented in the future that we cannot even fathom today. So I don't buy that. I do, though, buy the diversity point. And I think the diversity point is a variant of what I was talking about with having engineers and metallurgists and physicists and, you know, talking to different people and that people who have, and I think your British example is an example of that as they went around the world, that as people who have different backgrounds, different training, who've thought about different things, who've never thought about a problem before, but who are smart and creative, as they sit down and they address those problems, I think you're much more likely to get good, interesting results. You know, there is a famous business book, Good to Great, which probably a number of people in this room have read. And one of the things, the very first thing that they talk about in any business is the who, not the what. Get the right people, whoever they are. You know, in this example, it's people of disparate backgrounds, and the what will just kind of take care of itself. You know, I don't buy the fact that everything's been invented, but I do buy the fact that diversity and interaction of people of different backgrounds is very, very important to innovation.
A lot of countries now actually have innovation policies. Is that something governments can do? Can governments spur innovation?
You know, they can certainly spur innovation, okay? For example, investment in basic research, easy, education. You know, infrastructure, you know, buying electron microscopes or whatever the things are that you need these days. Clearly, government has a role, and a very important role, in innovation. The place where I kind of fall off the wagon is when governments try to pick winners and losers, because, and particularly in technologies as opposed to basic research. That most governments, my government certainly, but most governments don't have a very good track record in picking winning technologies. They have a very good track record with respect to where to invest in basic research. But when a government tries to be a venture capitalist, when the government tries to be a private equity firm, yeah, that sometimes doesn't work out so well. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that in my country. You know, the Solyndra thing is an example of that, and it wasn't, you know, I know a number of the people who were involved in that. These are good people who were doing their damnedest to do the right thing, but it's the government. It's just not, they're not as good at it. Indeed, some of these people were venture capitalists, were expert venture capitalists, but there's something about when you're forced to make these decisions quickly that you just don't do it as well with the government. But yeah, the government does have a big role, particularly in investment in stuff that you need for basic research. All right, we got somebody from Kitchener, which is near my second favorite place. And it's John from Kitchener who asks, attracting and retaining talent is widely agreed as critical for innovation. Do you think the current U.S. immigration policy is optimal for attracting and retaining highly talented immigrants? If not, what kinds of reforms would you suggest? Well, John, the current U.S. immigration policy is not optimal for anything, okay? Our immigration policies are a mess, right? For example, and this is, I think, the most telling point in response to this, we have the best and the brightest people in the world who come to American universities for undergraduate work and particularly for graduate work. And they come there and they get their PhDs from the best universities in our country, and they become physicists and engineers and all these things, and then we promptly kick them out. And many of them, not all, but many of them would love to stay and try to stay, and we don't let them stay. That isn't very smart, okay? You know, we have to do a better job with respect to our immigration. Our, I've lost track of the designation, but the visas, what's the visas for tech workers, the H-1B. The H-1B visas and the way that we allocate H-1B visas, crazy, okay? Doesn't make any sense. Now, we're doing a little bit better in that now than we did before, but we're not doing it right. The problem with immigration in the United States, for those of you who follow U.S. politics, is everybody, you know, there are some things everybody can agree on. You know, probably everybody pretty much agrees, you know, let those guys with the PhDs stay. But as soon as somebody says, okay, let's pass a bill to let the guys with the PhDs stay, somebody else wants to do something about putting up a border fence or doing, you know, something else. There's always a trade-off. And in case you haven't noticed, we aren't so good at dealing with those trade-offs at the moment. And so the answer, John, from Kitchener, my second favorite place in Canada, is that our immigration policy is flawed and it does not serve us well. Canada, on the other hand, has a much stronger immigration policy. You know, Canada has many of the basic building blocks to an incredible generation or generations of prosperity. And one of them is a very open and very progressive immigration policy. And you're way ahead of us there. We got some things we're ahead of you on, but that's one where you're ahead of us. Yeah.
I'm not supposed to speak until this stops.
You go ahead.
Hi, welcome, Your Excellency, and thank you for coming to our community. I'm on the innovation, back to innovation idea again. As I listened to you, and I was moved by learning about the Bell Lab and all the people that have developed those wonderful inventions. And then I began thinking that, you know, really, I hate to see a community of people think that only innovation takes place in think tanks like the Bell Lab. I like to think that perhaps innovation can take place within a community who is invited to participate in a problem. And perhaps engineers and scientists and other people who have the training to develop specific instruments might throw those problems out to the public, and they might find they could get an idea coming at them that is innovative if, in fact, innovation is a result of ideas expressed creatively. Some people in our society who don't have training are capable of that. Do you feel that we can do more as a society to invite in and be more inclusive of those who have brains and who might have some ideas beyond the training that think tank people have?
You know, I didn't mean to suggest, if I did, or leave the impression that the only place where innovation can occur is in, you know, Bell Lab kind of places or think tanks or even universities or anything else.
Well, I think those places are important.
They are critically important, but your point, to me, is the same point that I'm trying to make, which is bringing people together in whatever way you do it, who interact, who talk, who think, who have the opportunities to express their views, who can criticize, who can, you know, people can get in a room and yell at each other in a nice way. That's where innovation takes place. It doesn't have to be in a Bell Labs long hallway with open doors. It could be at a Starbucks or a Tim Hortons. But it can be anywhere. And you know, one of the things, and in defense of technology and distributed networks. One of the things that we do have the opportunity to do now is to bring people of disparate backgrounds and wisdom together, both in real time and in phased, there's a word for it, but people leaving something on, and this is the whole notion of this wiki notion of posting information and other people can comment on it. And the notion is that if you got enough smart people, you're going to get a better result. And again, it's just a sort of a more modern variant of this same thing. But again, it is interaction. My own view is, it's just me personally, I don't think as well that way, and I think there are a lot of people who don't think as well that way, and that they think better when there's somebody staring them across the table. But if that's what works, it's the same concept. The fact is, Twitter, which I made fun of, I'm a voracious consumer of Twitter because I get lots of ideas and lots of thoughts, and much of it's junk. But some of it's good, and some of it gets me to thinking, and that's the key here, is to get you to think.
One of the most unique ways of teaching is to have students sit in small groups, and they call it collaborative learning, and they do brainstorm and share ideas, and it's amazing. How effectively kids could work together, and the really neat ideas they can come up with as a group, as opposed to single people.
And part of it is not just the ideas they came up with, but learning how to work together as a group and learning how to interact. Because my guess is the thing that they come up with in the second grade is probably not going to change the world, but they've learned how to do something that maybe someday will change the world. Yeah. Oh, okay. Where will? Oh.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
So, thank you for some very interesting discussion about the cultural drivers of innovation. And since you followed that up by talking about facilitating international trade, I was wondering if you could comment on the increased competition that comes from international trade and how that encourages or impedes innovation.
I am a believer, and my boss, the President of the United States, is a believer in the fact that fair international trade is good, period, full stop. It is good for the country that is selling the stuff. It is good for the country that is buying the stuff. In this context, I think, and you are seeing this certainly in the United States, and I believe in Canada as well, the incredible global nature of our economy, the incredible level of competition in our societies and across cultures has spurred a whole different way of approaching these problems. If you 20 years ago, people weren't having these conversations about what we can do to spur innovation in the United States. It's like, hey, we owned it. But now we realize that there are other people who are pretty good at it, and that they're very clever, and that they've got a lot of resources, and that makes us better. And we, as a society, benefit from what they're coming up with. So I think it's good. It's good economically. It is good in terms of spurring innovation. A variant of this, again, talking about this earlier, but a variant is there is a lot of talk now in Canada about the notion that Canada will open up trade with Asia and particularly China. And gee, what is the United States? I'm asked about this all the time. What do you guys think about that? Are you threatened by that? And my answer to that is the same answer that I gave you, that when our largest trading partner, by a lot, opens up new areas of trade, new avenues of trade with places in the world that they are not now trading in, as we are trying to do, that is good, not just for Canada, that is good for the United States. That if it's goods, there's going to be more U.S. content in those goods. If it is natural resources, there is going to be more U.S. equipment and technology that's used to get it out of the ground. There will be more money in Canada to buy stuff from the United States, which you like to buy. And so it's good. It's just good. And I am, it's got to be fair. There are a lot of problems with trade with some countries, again, most notably China. But there are problems with trade in a number of places, and so it's got to be fair, it's got to be open. There are problems that the United States has with Canada in both directions. We're not perfect by any means, but fair trade between countries is good, period. Yeah.
Thank you for coming to our region of Waterloo, Mr. Ambassador, which of course is Kitchener-Waterloo and our neighbors in South
And I love it here.
Yeah, first, second, and third, I know, just mix them all, right?
It's top three.
You were very eloquent in your reference to our very unique relationship as Canadians and Americans. We share the longest border in the world. We have a lot of things in common. We share the same continent, the same languages, the same politics, democratic societies, and many of the same resources. Having said that, I'm wondering, this is a semi-loaded question. What do you think, and I'm sure you've had some thoughts about it, what do you think that the Americans as a country can bring to Canada to enhance our relationships and improve our lives on a go-forward basis, and what do you think Canadians can export outside the BlackBerry to the U.S. to, again, enhance your relationships with us?
I will first say, if I didn't say this in my remarks, that the United States is lucky to have Canada as our next-door neighbor. That I can tell you Americans believe that, and I would like to think that Canadians feel lucky that the United States is their neighbor. We work together for the security of North America. We share values, not only at home but around the world. We work together as partners around the world. So, we're doing pretty well. I think, one of the, I guess it's a very good question, and I'm stalling for time here, so I come up with a good answer. But what occurs to me as I'm sitting here is NAFTA. Okay, NAFTA was something that was not unlike the Laurier quotes in my speech. NAFTA was something that there were people on both sides of the border who really didn't want it. They thought this was the end of sovereignty, that this was the end of days. It was going to be terrible. And the fact of the matter is that as we opened up ourselves to trade in that instance, that the winners were everybody. And to me, I guess that's kind of the core of the answer to the question is, it's not just trade, but the exchange of ideas, the exchange of people, the free movement of people. These are really good things. And, there may be some period of time when it benefits one country more than the other. Canada right now probably has more jobs that are available, or at least did until very, very recently, than we have in the United States. But, 2 years from now, they may flip around. But the fact of the matter is that if we have labor mobility, if we have mobility of goods, if we have mobility of ideas, if students can study in one country and the other, that's good. So, I think the key is opening ourselves up to each other in a whole variety of different ways.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Okay. I think we got somebody up in the rafters there. Oh, a bunch of people up in the rafters.
Thank you very much.
I will tell you, when I went to class, I always sat in the back row, so I have an affinity for people who are in the back. There's hope for you.
Sharing stories about the labs.
Okay.
I think there was a couple of points out of that I thought were important, and that you were talking about sort of the spirit of diversity in different disciplines coming together and working together, and also the spirit of collaboration. I think when we look at the challenges of, say, the current economic system and that drive for the next sales quarter, how that potentially impedes collaboration and also the opportunity for diversity of ideas to come together. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts of how you might get, say, Apple and RIM in the same room together to collaborate on.
I'm not going there. I'm reminded in that of General Petraeus was in Ottawa not too long ago, and this was actually while he was still in the military and had not yet gone to be the director of the CIA. And someone asked him a very touchy question, and he said, I didn't become a 4-star general by stepping on landmines. So it's kind of next. Over there.
Hi, Ambassador Jacobson. My question is about intellectual property rights. Living here in Waterloo, I do get a chance to share lunch or drinks with software engineers, computer sciences, and more often than not, the complaints about intellectual property is that a lot of the rules are a hindrance rather than an encouragement for innovation. To give an example, Samsung is being sued by Apple over the slide lock on the Galaxy Nexus, or BlackBerry is being sued over the symbol button on the BlackBerry keyboard. So these things are really peripheral to the actual innovation of the product. It's this tiny little feature that they have to keep fighting lawsuits over. So how does the United States, mostly on a global level where these discussions take place, intend to resolve that issue of sort of useless patent disputes happening in these really fast changing technological areas?
Yeah. Well, okay. It is, first of all, I'm not a patent lawyer. Although I did have a Mustang. No, I had some experience in that. The United States just changed its patent laws in the most fundamental way that they've changed in generations. The changes were not perfect, but some of the changes were designed to deal with the kinds of things that you're talking about. There is good protection of intellectual property, and there is bad protection of intellectual property. Just like anything else, it can be abused. But having said that, if you don't protect what at least reasonable people could agree is the kind of intellectual property that we need to protect, you are not going to have innovation. And just to take the most blatant examples, if someone can steal the computer code and then just start selling it on their own, or if someone can, quite frankly, download some music for free instead of paying for it, then what's going to happen eventually is people aren't going to make music, and people aren't going to make movies, and people aren't going to write software. It's not going to be zero, but there's going to be less innovation. We live in a knowledge-based economy. That's the reality of the deal. And yeah, I want as much manufacturing to come back to the United States and Canada as we can possibly get. But the fact of the matter is that what we're going to excel in are high-value add, knowledge-based systems and products and ideas. And unless we protect those things, we are going to have far less innovation in our society. And I do believe that. Of course there are abuses. Of course there's stupid patent litigation. Of course there are bad rules. But there are an awful lot of good rules. And I think the answer to bad rules is to fix the bad rules, not to say, gee, we shouldn't be protecting intellectual property, because I think that's the road to ruin. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You've spoken a lot tonight about the importance of diversity in both technological and cultural change. And as a PhD student at the University of Waterloo in the history department, I'm just wondering what role you see those of us who are in the humanities playing in this change?
You know, again, great question. And just as an aside, the reason that I like coming to universities and doing things like this is because I get really good questions, and it causes me to think in the same exact way that the guy is walking down the hall at Bell Labs, and you know, that's good. You know, I'm not as smart as they were, but you know, whatever I can do, every little bit helps. But I think, to answer your question, that in a different way, it is at least as important, if not more important. You know, I am reminded, as you're talking about history, about, you know, over the last couple of years, there has been this view among some in the United States that, you know, our best years are behind us, that we're never going to recover, that this is the end of the American era, that all these terrible things, and we have this terrible division, and we've never had anything like it, and on and on and on. And I was reading a book 6 or 8 months ago, a great history. It's a book called Freedom from Fear by David Kennedy, which is the history of Franklin Roosevelt's years in the White House. And the first half of it is about the Depression, and the second half of it is about the war. And in the first half, you could have taken a word processor and changed Franklin Roosevelt to Barack Obama in 1935 to 2009, 2010, and you would have had the same book, the same demagoguery, the United States is never going to be the same, we're never going to innovate, we're never going to lead, other countries are going to pass us by. It was different other countries, but other countries were going to pass us by. And as everybody knows, that's not the way it worked out. And I think it is very important that those of us who are not focused on history and do not study history and do not study English and do not, that we benefit from the thinking and the understanding that provides. I have a friend. I was at the Stratford Festival last summer, and I went with a friend from Washington who is an extremely successful entrepreneur, And he's a big Shakespeare fan. And when he is asked by people, you know, what can I do to become a better entrepreneur? And he teaches a lot and he lectures a lot. And he said, read Shakespeare. And he said, anything you need to know is in there. You know, it may have been a slight overstatement, but the concept is the same, that the rest of us can learn an awful lot by studying the humanities, by studying history, by studying literature, by studying philosophy. It's really an important part of this, and you know, I applaud you for what you do. All right, we got Ravi from Toronto. And I love Toronto too. Actually, I'm from Chicago. It's really a lot like Toronto. So Ravi, he asks, do you think that post-secondary institutions in the United States and Canada should more actively recruit each other's students in an effort to promote innovation, so that American students can study in Canada more frequently at reasonable costs and vice versa? Well, I'll begin by saying that I have voted with my feet on that one. My son goes to McGill. You know, and the fact is, he has gotten a tremendous amount out of being at a school in Canada. And, you know, he probably would have gotten more if he was at Waterloo, but I didn't become a diplomat for nothing. But the fact is that learning about other countries, being exposed to other countries, being exposed to their cultures, being exposed to their manner, being exposed to their ideas is enormously valuable, and not just on the technical side. You know, I oftentimes say that in the 2.5 years that I've been the United States ambassador to Canada, I have learned a great deal about Canada, and I really have. But I think I've learned more about the United States. Because I look at some of the things that we do in the United States and some of the things that I took for granted, or some of the things that I thought I understood, and I look at them through a different perspective. And I think that one of the things that you get as, particularly as a young person, as a student, in going to another country, is you start to look at your own world through a little bit different prism. It's what travel's all about. And so I think the answer to that is that, it's critically important for students to move back and forth, not just between the United States and Canada. You know, those are the two countries I am the most worried about, but between any countries. Again, it's kind of like trade is good, and I don't care if they're going to, you know, China or Bolivia or Canada. U.S. students going to those places, that's good for the United States, and it's probably good for that country. All right, we got time for one more up there.
Hi, thanks for coming tonight. I was just wondering, you discussed the Regulatory Cooperation Council briefly, and sort of gave the example about harmonizing with Cheerios. And I was wondering if you had any concerns about the potential lowering of standards that could occur, like in areas of health or public safety. So like pesticide use or pharmaceuticals, and as well if you know if there's any safeguards to sort of prevent a so-called race to the bottom of standards.
I will tell you what I have told industry groups, labor groups, consumer groups, and I have met with scores of them about this, that if this is perceived, or if this were to become a race to the bottom, if this were to become a way to deregulate things that ought to be regulated, this will fail. And that is not what this is about. You know, people have suggested in some of these meetings, well, if there's one standard that says 8 and the other standard says 10, just go to the 8 standard. Just always go to the lower standard. And if that's what we do, this will fail. It will stop. That is not what we intend. That's not what we want. This is not an effort to eliminate regulation. There are efforts in both of our countries to rationalize the regulatory process. There are things about, and I speak about mine, there are things about the regulatory process in the United States that sometimes don't make sense. But this is not an effort to do that. This is an effort to find a formula for Cheerios and a formula for Cheerios and say, oh, it really doesn't matter. I mean, it's things that are different just because they're different. There are, everything in my life has to be in threes. There are 3 kinds of regulatory differences. Again, vast oversimplification. One is differences that are different because there's a reason for the difference. For example, Canada uses a metric system. U.S. uses an English system. You have labels in French and English. We have just labels in English. Okay, those aren't going to change. There's good reasons. It's colder in Canada for the most part, so you may have to have different car batteries or something. But then the second category are regulatory differences that are different, and they're different in order to protect industries on one side or the other of the border. I may make somebody mad in this room, I don't know, but everywhere in the world, or almost everywhere, baby food is sold in 2-ounce jars. And apparently the reason is that's how much babies eat. In Canada, baby food is sold in 4.5-ounce jars by law. And the reason is because there is a manufacturer in Canada that makes 4.5-ounce jars, and it doesn't make sense because of the size of the market in Canada versus the rest of the world for the baby food manufacturers in the United States and elsewhere to make baby food in 4.5-ounce jars. So it protects an industry. Okay, that is bad. It's a trade barrier, and it's not a good trade barrier. And there are a million of them. I don't want to single out baby food, but I did. Just kidding, Gerber. It wasn't Gerber. It's not Gerber. It's not. Gerber's our guy. But anyway, that's bad. But that's one where, you know, there's going to be pushback if you try to change it. And then the third category are the ones that are just different. The formulas for deodorant. The fact that seat belts are different in the United States and Canada. Doesn't matter if the seatbelt was made in the United States or made in Canada, if it was installed in a car in the United States or installed in a car in Canada, It's where it's going to be sold, and the seatbelts are different. And I would venture that anyone in this room who has gone on a vacation in the United States and rented a car, that the first thing that goes through your mind is not, I'm going to die because I got these American seatbelts. You know, the fact is, ours work pretty well. I'm not too worried when I ride around in cars here in Canada using the Canadian seatbelts. And the fact is, we can just probably pick one. Now, how we resolve the differences, you know, there's probably going to be a lot of horse trading that's involved. But if the test is, you know, one country's got seatbelts that work, and the other country's got seatbelts that don't work, but they're cheaper, and we pick the ones that don't work, then we will fail. So I think the answer to that is, you know, you kind of got to trust the good intentions of the people who are doing it, and you got to watch us. You know, one of the things, again, that I say to everyone when I talk both about beyond the border and regulatory cooperation is a lot of people who have been following this have seen this movie before, and it does not have a happy ending. And the reason, or one of the reasons that it is going to be different this time is because we are encouraging, we are demanding that the citizens on both sides of the border hold our feet to the fire and hold us accountable. And one of the ways that they should hold us accountable is in the very thing that you talk about, that if people see that all we're doing is race to the bottom, you know, shame on us and tell us. So that's not our intention, and we're counting on all of you to keep us honest. Thank you all very much. It was a pleasure to be here, and again, thanks to the university, and thanks to the Institute, and thanks to Jim.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those remarks tonight, for the excellent discussion tonight, really the great conversation we've had. I was very pleased to hear you couch your initial remarks in terms of the Bell Laboratories story that ran in the New York Times, because the link to that story went ricocheting through CG, the think tank's internal email networks on Monday morning, because it's exactly the sort of thing we've been trying to create here. It's interesting to me that Jim Bosley, who helped bring a technology to the world that helps people connect over long distances, also saw the value in putting under one roof here on the CG campus policy practitioners with a lot of experience, as well as scholars at the Bosley School and graduate students with all of their energy and ideas, and the soon-to-come international law program, and seeing how those people work together. There is real value in that, and you, Mr. Ambassador, raised that metaphor to the bilateral or international level, demonstrating to us in your remarks through the conversation how we are really under one roof here on this continent, and the opportunities we have through innovation to make that partnership stronger. You had many good examples, but I think that if your vision is enacted, that in future it might be known more famously as JCP, or the Jacobson Cheerios paradigm. So thank you for that. And although you made a rolling joke out of your affection for so many communities across Canada, I don't doubt your sincerity, having been at the group at dinner with you and hearing you talk lovingly of your many travels throughout Canada, including to very small communities far north of the tree line and other places. I do believe that over the past 2 years, you've demonstrated that your doors are certainly open like those at Bell Laboratories. So thank you for the generosity of time you gave us at the Bosley School today in your talks with students, for your generosity of time here with the community of Waterloo tonight, and you're certainly welcome back anytime. So, a couple of brief notes for the audience before we adjourn. The video from tonight's live webcast will be edited and posted to CG's website in our online video archive. I'd like to say thanks to the Bosley School of International Affairs for their support in making this signature lecture a success, as well as CG event sponsors 570 News and Wordsworth Books. Please note the next two CG events. On March 14th, John Curtin, a professor of political science at U of T, University of Toronto will be discussing Japan's contribution to global governance. This signature lecture is a webcast-only event, as Professor Curtin will be delivering the address at a private function, but you can sign up for the webcast at CG Online. And then on April 11th, we'll meet again here in the CG Auditorium for an event called Iran and the West, a Dialogue of Ambassadors. And this event will feature James Blight, CG Chair in Foreign Policy Development and Balsley School Professor, in discussion with former U.S. Ambassador Thomas Pickering and former Iranian Ambassador Hussein Mousavian. They will be discussing how to bring Iran in from what has been described as their increasing international isolation. Also, this Friday, March 2nd, we'll be offering a guided tour of the CG campus at 12 noon. If you're interested in seeing the new building, please meet us in the lobby of the CG campus just before noon. So stay tuned to our events calendar at the CG website as we continue our signature lecture series, and be sure to register for our events newsletter. Thank you once again for coming to CG tonight, even in this ice storm. Wishing you a safe journey home. Thank you.